Lethal Weapon and its sequels represent the quintessential buddy movies, thanks to the chemistry between Mel Gibson and Danny Glover. In his new movie, however, Danny Glover's co-star is an 8,000-pound elephant. It's called Operation Dumbo Drop. We got to find out about that first. Tell me about that.
She was wonderful. I
Really?
mean, she was really
Now tell the
special.
truth. When you walked up to an 8,000-pound elephant, you were scared, right?
I was kind of nervous initially.
Were you?
But she had two wonderful trainers. They're a husband and wife team, Carrie and Gary. And they'd been with her, Ty is her name, all her life. So she was just, they assured us that she was very comfortable around us, around people, that she was very,
Gentle,
cognizant, gentle. She worried about not stepping on you and all. I mean, she'd do little things like put a trunk on you and touch you with a trunk and all that.
That's better than a woman. I don't know if it's better than a woman, but it's more consistent. At least you can count on it, right?
Yeah, well, well, I don't know about that. I can't.
No comment.
Yeah, no comment on that one.
Is the movie a good movie, or did you have fun doing it, working with an elephant?
Well, I had fun doing it.
Did you?
I think the movie for me it's something about the integrity of the characters and this story.
It's about Vietnam, I think.
It's a movie that takes place in Vietnam. But it's not about Vietnam. It's not about the war, It's about this relationship that happens with these men, which they go and find this elephant for this small village, and that journey takes them somewhere else, and it's a very beautiful in that way because they try to do something that's good. They try to do something that they consider to be right.
Danny, you know what I watch you on all the time? Is the Civil War series you did, I guess, for PBS?
It's
what was it?
For Art and Entertainment, A&E.
Arts and Entertainment, where you tell the story of the Civil War, you host those things. Now, I know those in our business are wraparounds. I mean, you go in, you shoot all of them, and so on.
Yeah.
Were you interested in the Civil War personally?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah?
From the time I was a kid,
Really?
I tell people one of my favorite generals, the first generals that I really liked, was Robert E. Lee, Because he seemed like a very compassionate man.
Yeah.
To his soldiers and about issues. He's caught in the crossfire, representing his states' rights as opposed to the Union itself.
Yeah, he wasn't pro-slavery, but a lot of people thought that Lee must have been fighting for slavery. He wasn't. He was fighting to defend Virginia.
Virginia, exactly.
Really
he'd always say, "I'm a son of Virginia," And I guess at that particular point, people saw themselves as representative of their state as opposed to a union. Maybe that was the definitive act that brought the country together as a nation.
It's an interesting thing because that war, the war is particularly special because they had fathers fighting against sons and brothers against brothers.
Absolutely.
And, that was a war that African Americans fought in. You don't hear about that a lot, but they had regiments of African Americans.
Well, yeah, absolutely. The 54th, the Massachusetts regiment. They did a movie on it with Denzel and with Morgan Freeman. Yeah.
It's interesting knowing your background as an activist, and I say that gently because he was actually kind of a radical activist at one time in your life, weren't you?
Well, that was when I was a student at San Francisco State, and I was a student in the late '60s. There was a period of time where I considered myself to be progressive. I mean, to use the word radical in a sense is a stretch, but progressive in the sense that some of the ideas may have been ideas that were germane to that particular point in time.
Were you ever a member of the Black Panther Party?
I wasn't a member of the Black Panther Party, yet I worked in programs that were associated with the Black Panther Party.
About 1966, as I recall, Huey Newton and Bobby Seale started something called the Black Panther Party, which was essentially in favor of separatism.
No. The Black Panther Party was in favor of self-defense. The Black Panther Party was in favor of self-defense. People get this Black Panther Party mixed up with other groups that have by virtue of the use of the word black, denoted that they want to be separate. But the Black Panther Party was in terms related to self-defense. Community control of police.
Well, this was the earliest speaking out that I recall about police brutality, that kind of thing?
Absolutely. They were about self-defense. They were talking about forming a police community review board, all those kind of things, and controlling what happened in the community, And that's what the Black Panther Party was. There were other Black Panther parties. There was the Black Panther Party that started in Lowndes County, Mississippi, which was another Black Panther Party that started with self-defense also. But this started around the Voter Registration Act around in the mid-'60s.
This is a retaliation to what the Klan did in this country, where they didn't want African Americans to vote, and didn't allow them to vote.
But note that the first Black Panther Party was around in the 1880s. That was formed for the same reason. African Americans formed the Black Panther Party at that particular point to protect themselves against the Klan. This was in Mississippi as well. So the party that was organized in Mississippi, in Lowndes County, was basically was inspired by the same party that had been organized in Lowndes County some 80 years before.
Are you the same guy today that you were in the 60s? Have you changed in any way? Do you think personally you've changed?
Well, I think time brings a bit of moderation. Time brings a sense of that the world doesn't change in a day. I mean, when you're 21 years old, 22 years old, you want to do it now. You believe it changes now. That you have the capacity to change it now.
Right.
And there's always a sense of invincibility when you're 20 years old. You know.
You don't know you can die. You're stupid.
Yeah, well, to some extent, you know. But the other thing that's happened is that you realize that you're part of a continuum. Too often we separate ourselves from history. We think that we make our history now, and our history at that particular point is the end and the be-all. But we are part of a continuum in history, every single one of them. Every single one of us as human beings, every single one of us who's part of an ethnic group is part of a continuum. I'm as much a part of that continuum that stretches from my grandparents, that stretches before them, to my great-grandfather was born into slavery. So I'm a part of that continuum. And that continuum is on a constant, progressive, I believe, progressive move for change. Even though there's setbacks, and we can talk about the setbacks from affirmative action to other things, but that continuum is on a constant progression for change.
Knowing what your parents and your grandparents and your great-grandparents went through in this country, do you ever get up in the morning and say, thank God I'm born now? I mean, it ain't great, it ain't right, it ain't perfect, but it's better than it was?
Well, I know that they made a contribution to where I'm at now, in their subtle way, in their small way, and sometimes magnetic way. They've made a contribution to what I am now, you know. So, in a sense, I think that I don't think that way in some sense. I know that at periods of time that we had to deal with issues of lynching. We had to deal with where we had to protect ourselves. And sometimes do you
ever have that feeling today as an African American in America that, geez, you know, if I got off on a lonely road some night and the cops pull me over, I could have a problem? Do you ever think that today? That ever go through your mind?
I realize that I'm an African American.
And that could be a problem.
Every single day in my life, that could be a problem. I realize that despite my success, I realize that I'm still African American, and that could be a problem for some people. That could be a problem somewhere in the Midwest. It could be a problem perhaps someplace in the South. It could be a problem perhaps someplace in South Central as well. And I realize that, you know, and that's something you live with. You think about it and you say, in a sense, thank God that my mother, my father, my grandparents, and everybody else who came before me, who's experienced this experience, has left me with something to kind of understand it a little bit. Not place it in the context of something that I dismiss or pretend it doesn't exist, but understand it and live with it and go on.
How do you do it without making yourself? How does that not make you bitter or angry?
Well, it makes you because you channel your anger some sort of way. We talk about in our life, every one of us has something to be angry about. We talked about that in Grand Canyon. All of us has some pain somewhere, but it's how you channel that pain, energy, creatively. I mean, maybe I get a chance to channel that pain by talking to 350 kids at the Boys Y in Boy and Girls Y in Kansas City, like I did last Monday, a week ago. Maybe I get a chance to say that and smile with them and talk about how can we get better. What do we do at 4, 5, 10 years old, at 15 years? How do we get better? Maybe I do that, you know. But in some ways, it allows me that opportunity to do that.
Very significant man, Danny Glover. We'll be right back.
too old for this.
I love that. That's funny. You laugh when you see that. How did it? That chemistry just either clicks or doesn't. I mean, there was one crazy white guy, right?
It clicked the first time that we met. I remember I was doing a play. It was 1986, March of 1986. I was doing a play in Chicago at Steppenwolf, and my agent sent me a script and sent me another script, which I'm not going to mention. And I said, I don't want to do this. Then they sent me this script, and I said, and I didn't read it. They said they want to meet you, they want you to do it, and you have to fly out now. It was Monday. It was my day off. I flew out Monday evening on like a 7 o'clock flight or whatever. Got to, or maybe a 9 o'clock flight. Right. Got to Los Angeles at about midnight, and read the script on the plane. Loved the script. Went to sleep that morning. At 7 o'clock, I got up and went to Richard Donner's house, where he had bangers and everything else, and eggs, and we had breakfast. And Mel and I read this entire script, with doing all the other parts in the first one. We did all the other parts. We read the entire script, and then I'm trying to think who was there. Some Warner Brother execs were there, and they said, well, it was silent for a minute. We said, let's go make this movie. So
Did you know Mel before then?
I had met Mel once through. I met Mel briefly in the airport at the Venice Film Festival that year before.
I mean, he looks like there's a little divine madness in him. Like he's a little bit nuts. Is it? I mean,
but he's not.
Good? No, he's not. I mean, he knows what he's doing, but there's an edge.
Oh, yeah.
Am I right?
There's an edge.
And you know what I love about your work? You have that look on your face of a guy who says, I don't want to die today. This is not a good day to die. There's no reason for me to die. There's an enormous sense in your face when you just look at you and you just say, you can just do it with a look. It is beautiful. It's unbelievable. You're just great in that movie. Were you worried about doing an action film like that and somebody saying, well, that's not a serious film? How's he going to come back and do a really serious film?
Well, that was the point. I had looked at a lot of stuff. I had done Places in the Heart first. Right. I did Witness, and I did Silverado, and then I did Color Purple.
I loved doing Silverado. Did you have fun doing Silverado? Because it's hard to get cowboy parts if you're an African American, generally, right?
I bet your life. Lawrence Kasdan came to me and said, I met him, and he said, I want to do a movie, a Western with a black heroine. He did not say, I want to do a black Western. It was a Western with a black heroine. And Larry he wrote this wonderful, but Larry's like that. Larry's a visionary to me. Yeah. I mean, when he did Grand Canyon, he said, I don't know if this is going to work, but if it works, I'm going to call you, because I want you to do this role, because I think I'm writing this role for you. Right. You know, so Larry's he's trying to figure out what's happening in the world around here. He sees the polarization here. He sees the distance between people emotionally and physically, and he's trying to ask himself, why? What can we do about that? Mm-hmm. How do we touch each other?
Are we getting better at race relations in this country, or are things getting worse or the same, or where are we on the continuum of progress on that issue?
Well, I think I'm not, I'm not saying anything that anyone else hasn't said before, but I think there's a kind of passiveness about the whole issue of race. In fact, it's what Moynihan once said about benign neglect.
Benign neglect. Yeah.
It's just like people have neglected.
It's just not there.
It's just not there. Pretend it doesn't exist. In some sense, it's a sense of denial. But this is a country that does that. It lives it. It's lived its life, its whole history to some extent, in the sense of denial. When we talk about the Native American issues, we're talking about a country exploring or telling its history from the standpoint of denial, So I think once we begin to deal with that, we can't deal with any kind of the healing process that needs to go on unless we deal with that and realize that we live in that sense of denial. And what we do, what we push up, what we prop up of all the elements that raise up the sense of fear in us. Whenever there's an issue that's tantamount to changing our concepts, to really pushing us forward, the elements of fear seem to seep their head up. The whole issue about affirmative action, which I come out against. I mean, we're talking about affirmative action. And there's some interesting statistics. If you look at the University of Missouri Medical School, today it is 40% women. 40% women. Most of those are white women. 20 years ago, when affirmative action came into being as law, there weren't that many women in there. There weren't that many black women. There weren't that many white women in there. Something has happened
So
over
you're
that
saying
process.
it worked?
It's worked. It's worked for women. It's worked primarily. Affirmative action has worked primarily for white women. Worked primarily for white women.
Now, are you for it or against it?
I'm for it, of course.
Yeah.
You know, I'm for it against affirmative action, you know? And what we've done is that we raised this whole spectrum of fear. We say it's not perfect in some sense, you know? If the federal government is giving, say, hypothetically, $200 billion worth of money away for projects,
right,
and African-American firms get $1 billion, what's the big deal?
Right.
You know, or $2 billion? What's the big deal?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Well, have to really be sensible about this, you know? But we know what's happening, that jobs are getting scarce, major corporations, international corporations are laying off people. You know, and the price of our items haven't gone down, but they're laying off people. Jobs are getting scarce. We know that, and that's always fuels the specter of fear.
Okay, fear is the greatest enemy. Social activist, great actor, Danny Glover. We'll be right back. Talk about his new movie right after these messages. It looks like a good movie.
Yeah, it's a fun movie.
Yeah?
It's a good movie.
You know what's interesting to me? You have great military bearing when you want to. For a guy who grew up sort of a progressive and Ashbury, you know, you got that old cop down pretty good. You got that old military man down pretty good.
It's all in the uniform.
It's
with
the uniform,
man. It's something about the uniform.
You,
I tell you, when I was in high school, I remember the Marine recruiter came to my high school. I was about 17 years old, and I wanted to join the Marines. You know,
yeah,
I mean,
see
it was
that
just like,
and say, hey, that looks great.
you know, I think I was in ROTC when I was like 15, the first one when I was a freshman, sophomore in high school. So there's that sense of us.
That's right.
You know, particularly at that age, there's a sense of us of wanting to be part of something. The uniform defines us in a way. You know, when we're looking for elements to...
You know, that's an interesting thing, because I've talked about the inner city problem today.
Yeah.
Do you think those kids are, I mean, they join gangs because they don't have anything else,
Of
basically.
course.
But they have a need, this need to belong to something.
Well, that's what it is. It's a need, it's a camaraderie that happens with a gang. There's trust that builds up, the same kind of trust that happens in a military situation. It's trust that builds up. You know what the other guys are like. You know what the other guys are going to be like. They've got your back covered. The saying, they got my back covered.
How do you get those kids to overcome their circumstances and rise to the occasion with sort of positive value structure?
Well, see
were you a juvenile delinquent ever?
Well, not really. You know, I mean, part of the things, I mean, I ran with groups. You're going to run, boys are going to run in groups.
Right.
I mean, they did it when I did it. They did it when my dad did it. They're going to do it. They're going to run in groups. How do you take that energy of that which we know of and direct that into institutions which provide some positive, some very positive nurturing for them? And that's what it is about nurturing. It's all about fear. We talked. We backed off from fear. We left fear when we took the break just now. But it's all about fear. And right there at that age is critical with the fear elements because you act out of fear.
Almost everybody acts out of fear all the time. That's the predominant.
But you act so much out of fear because I mean even the kind of very bravado that those guys walk around, it comes out of fear. You know, you break it down.
It's a way of warding off fear.
Exactly.
Walk with
well,
that,
not so much warding off it. It's a subtle, subconscious acknowledgement of that fear. So what you do is you act out something else. You know.
Is there a point of connection between whites and blacks in this country where they don't have to fear each other? I mean, how do you get them so they don't? I mean,
this is very interesting. I've been on the board of directors of a drug rehab program, and it's called Walden House in San Francisco. And one of the reasons why I'm on the board of directors is right down the street from my house, one of their facilities. So they asked me to be on the board of directors, and so I went to a graduation, and I saw something like 25 testimonials. These are men, women who came up and said, man, you know, this is what's happening. Thank you, Walden House. And I'd see guys come up. One white guy who may have been an account exec somewhere, and he got involved in some substance abuse and whatever. And one black guy, he says, man, I want to thank Alan over there, man. And Alan may be from hardcore projects or whatever. I think Alan, man, because Alan showed me so much love, and I you know, I want to thank him because he helped me in those tough moments when I was going. And Alan got up here and said, John, man, I love that man. John John touched my life, man, and helped me through those rough moments, and he heard me and listened. It was this incredible revelation when I sat up there. I say, all these people, they had reached the bottom, literally and figuratively, and they were able to hold on to each other. Does it take us to reach the bottom to grasp each other? They were to hold on to it and say that they love each other.
All of life is
Love
about
each
love
other.
or fear.
Love or fear.
Every emotion. Hate is a form of fear.
Yes,
Am I right?
Yeah.
And the only thing that overcomes it is love.
Is love.
Right?
Yeah.
And why don't we get, that's a fairly simple message. Why don't we get that through to
as
people?
Martin would say, agape love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you know I met Martin Luther King once? I met him in I forget what year it would have been, 1966 or 67. He was on the Mike Douglas show.
Yeah.
And he was a funny guy off screen. He was very funny in the green room. People don't, you don't see that in the old Martin Luther King movie. He was a pretty funny guy.
Yeah.
Very fast lines, very quick. You know?
Yeah.
Good guy, good guy.
Yeah, good guy.
What? Tell me about this movie. It's out this week.
It's out this week. It's a family movie.
Did you learn anything of Vietnamese language by doing this movie? Or?
Some segments. In fact, I do speak Vietnamese in it, and
Are you quick with learning languages, or no? Do you have to really?
This is one of the things that I want to say. There's one thing you talk about. Your life is about love, understanding, and learning, and everything else. And if the one thing that I want to do is learn more languages.
So you can move around.
I mean, sometimes the people I want to talk to speak so eloquently and so beautifully in French or Spanish or whatever, and I want to talk to them and I want to communicate with them. So it involves me learning their language,
Well, I'm a great believer that people who live in America ought to learn the English language. How do you feel about that? Just cab drivers and room service alone make it tough. You know what I mean? I'm for it for that reason.
Yeah. But I like languages. I like the sound of languages.
Yeah.
But at times there are moments that that I can learn. The phrases that I can learn, and I'm in the moment. And I'm susceptible to all the influences and all the nuances of the language, and then I can pick up things,
Let me switch to politics for a second, because the African American is Colin Powell, who's being touted as a possible presidential or vice presidential candidate. Can you give me a comment on that? How do you feel about that?
Colin Powell's a very extraordinary man. It's a man who's taken whatever it is in life and positioned himself and built himself and created something that's it's amazing. Mr. Cassidy was the head of Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Man who's head of Joint Chiefs of Staff, which is
that's pretty
an incredible responsibility.
Right.
An incredible responsibility. And the fact that you could say this is a black man who did this, but he was just a man who was capable of doing it.
Right,
That's
exactly.
ultimately his skill as a man enabled him to do that.
Right.
Will the American public be able to look at him in that way?
A man.
A man as president or vice president. That's the big question.
I think they will.
And maybe, as they say in movie films that you, how do they say that you're a crossover actor, or a crossover actress,
Yeah,
For me,
right.
they tell me that I'm a crossover actor,
Yeah.
and and so maybe he's able to cross over.
I saw Colin Powell last week. I happened to be invited down to the White House. Bill Clinton was very gracious and invited some people who knew George Bush. They had the unveiling of the portrait, and Colin Powell was there, and I went over and said, "Are you running?" And he is one cool customer. He said,
he's great.
He said, "Roger, if I am, you'll be the last to know."
He's got a sense of humor, too. We can use one right now,
Danny Glover, good luck with the new film.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming on.
All right.
Next up, a singer who never goes out of style. You'll hear why. Jack Jones is with us. Stay here.